Hi, I'm Pastor JJ White. I want to thank you for tuning in to today's Hitting the High Points. We're going to be in the book of Philippians once again, and we're still going to be in chapter 1. Last week, we looked at how Paul was thankful for the church at Philippi, and he was also thankful because he knew that God was going to complete the salvation he started in them. God finishes what he starts. And this week, we're going to start in verse number 12. But before we start reading, I want to ask you something. And I think it's a question that will resonate with most of you listeners. Have you ever been in a situation and wondered where God is, or what is God doing, or why is God allowing this to happen? I'm sure that we all have. I know I have been in many situations like that in my life where I've wondered, God, where are you? God, what are you up to? And as we look at Philippians chapter 1, Paul is going to be reassuring the Philippian church that God is up to something, even though Paul finds himself in a situation where it seems that God is up to nothing. Let's look at verse 12 of Philippians chapter 1. But I want you to know, brethren, that the things which happened to me have actually turned out for the furtherance of the gospel, so that it has become evident to the whole palace guard and to all the rest that my chains are in Christ. And most of the brethren in the Lord, having become confident by my chains, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. What Paul is saying here is Paul has found himself in prison. And I want you to think for a moment, what would be going through your mind if you were in prison? If you were in prison for your faith, and what would be going through your mind? A lot of us find ourselves in situations nowhere near as bad as a Roman jail cell or Roman house arrest for our faith. And a lot of us are going, God, what are you doing? God, why is this happening? And we begin to wallow around in a pit of self-pity. We begin to feel so sorry for ourselves, and we call people and we tell people that we're so upset and we don't know how we're ever going to overcome this and get through this heartache. Now, please don't misunderstand me to think that I am talking down to what you're going through. Hard times are real. Trials are real. And what is a trial for you may not be a trial for me, and that goes both ways, vice versa. But what we need to realize is what Paul realized as he was in this Roman house arrest. The church at Philippi, they were freaking out, thinking that Paul was going to be, that this was the end of the gospel, that Christianity was going to be stamped out because perhaps Christianity's greatest missionary, church planter, evangelist, Paul, was in prison. They were wondering, what is God doing? What is God up to? Well, Paul tells them what God is up to. Look what he says. I want you to know, brethren, the things which happened to me, referring to his imprisonment, maybe his beatings, his house arrest, those things that you thought were going to be the end of the gospel, that you thought were going to hinder me spreading the gospel, notice how they've turned out. They've actually turned out for the furtherance of the gospel. And friends, this is what we need to realize about the trials and tribulations we go through. Whether we're facing an illness or a problem with some friends, or we're facing loneliness or depression, anxiety, financial heartache, whatever the trial you're facing is, God may have allowed you to get there, or perhaps God puts you in that situation so that the gospel can be furthered in an area or to people or to one person who had never heard the gospel. That might just be exactly what God is doing with your current trial and your current tribulation. Maybe you or a loved one is sick. Maybe they have cancer. Maybe they have something worse. And you're so down on your luck. You're so sad. You're weeping. And look, I don't blame you. There's nothing wrong with mourning and sadness. But God may have allowed this to happen to you or to your loved one because through your trial, the gospel may be shared with someone in that hospital that had never heard it. Or maybe you're going through a financial heartache. Maybe through your financial heartache, God is going to put you in a place to share the gospel with someone whom you never would have encountered had it not been for this trial. My point is this. We often ask, God, what are you up to? God, what are you doing? How are you letting this happen? God often lets us go through difficulties so that His gospel can go out to places where it normally wouldn't go if our life was all peaches, sunshine, and rainbows. God is still at work in your situation, and He may be allowing you to go through what for you may be a living hell, so you can keep someone out of physical hell by sharing the gospel with them, so that they can put their faith in Christ. That's what God is doing. So many of us, we need to change our perspective about the trials we're going through, because God may be putting us to the fire to save someone from the fire. We need to change our perspective. We need to see things through the lens of God's eyes. We need to see things the way God sees them, as every trial, every tribulation, as a chance to further the gospel of Christ. And that's how I want to encourage you today. Whatever you're going through, change your perspective. God may be allowing you to go through it to share the gospel, and through you, save a soul.